Welcome, everyone. My name is Kirill, and today I have Lena with me, and we are excited to have you with us. Today's session is going to be dedicated to building an add-on for Creatio. And without a further ado, let me introduce myself and Lena. Hello,
Hi.
everyone. Hi. All right, Lena. So I'm quite excited to show what we have built for Hackathon. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the reasoning behind it and what was the idea and how we got started in this thing.
Yeah, so let's talk about why this particular add-on, what an add-on is. Basically, add-on is meant to enhance Creatio functionality. Basically, sometimes it has to do with connecting to another system, or it could be built within Creatio itself. But our idea was basically based on our own need to gather feedback from our training sessions. So basically, when we conduct a training, at the end of the training, all the participants receive a survey form where they can share whether they enjoyed the training session, their thoughts, and basically any additional information that they would like us to know about their experience. And that information helps us as trainers basically to modify our trainings to provide better user experience, right? So we know what works, what doesn't, based on that feedback. Because during this session, you don't really have always an opportunity to get that information from the participant. You basically work through the material, and only at the end of the session, the participant has a chance to evaluate their experience and basically tell us, well, was this good? Was the material and the in general presentation, did it work for the participant, and so on. And this approach will be useful for a lot of different business applications, because normally what you want to conduct whatever activity you want to do, and then ask the person involved in this, was it good? Can we improve? And that information can provide you very valuable feedback and help you improve your customer relationships. So basically, this is how we started. We had a couple of other solutions that we worked with. We had a Google form, we had Microsoft forms that we worked with, but when we were presented with the topics for the hackathon, we decided that this is a great opportunity to show how you can build this using basically Creatio, and how it's much better integrated with Creatio approach. So this is basically the backstory why we particularly
All
chose
right.
this topic.
That's true. That's true. So originally, I totally agree with you. We tried finding the ways to integrate Google and Microsoft forms, and we found some challenges, especially when the forms are being submitted. So it was something that we had in mind for quite some time, and it was just a great opportunity for us to go ahead and actually implement it. So let's take a look at the slides for our objective for today. So we're going to start off, and let me get my bearings. So we're going to start off by looking at the finished product. Obviously, I want to show you what the finished product may look like. We call it finished product in the sense that it's finished for the purpose of Hackathon. It's not finished for, let's say, my particular need or Lena's need or maybe somebody else's need. But as far as the add-on is concerned, we want to show you what we have built, and whatever we're going to show you today, this is the source code that we're going to share. The next thing, we're going to review major components. Originally, when we set out to prepare for Hackathon, we thought we're going to build everything live, but it quickly turned, we quickly realized that building something live that is a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more complex is not feasible, simply because there are many things to that we need to take care of. And so what we will rather do is we will concentrate on major components. We will discuss them in depth. And I think that's going to yield a better educational material than had we built everything from scratch. Once we did that, we're going to configure, or as part of our build and discussion, we're going to be configuring anonymous services. You will shortly see this is the heart of our solution here. We will review some external applications, because it's a kind of also a major component of what we're going to build today. And we're going to discuss potential consumer of our package solution. And when I say package solution, I mean everything that we build here today or in all 3 parallel tracks that is available. This is what we're going to discuss. Okay, so as part of this session, we're concentrating predominantly on add-ons. So it's going to be mainly development. We're going to be using some development. We're going to be programming, essentially writing some code, and then the other tracks are more low-code, no-code tools. So you can see how those, how we can achieve a nice synergy between the code and no-code and low-code components, and how we can leverage different skill sets when developing an application. All right. So it's time for us to jump into a live demo. Let me see if I can find how to change the screen. Okay, perfect. And what you should see now on my screen is essentially a login page. Now, this is a login page to just a regular Creatio application. There's nothing special about it. I just went ahead and asked for a trial version, just like everybody else on a hackathon. I believe that you were given 28 days, but I just went online and got myself a 14-day trial. So there is really no difference. Let's log in. We have added a few sections here. As you could see in the hackathon, we have added a few sections here. And inside this hackathon, we've created the section called survey. We've created complaint and training. These are sections that will help us work with the survey. So they're going to be kind of that consumer that I have alluded to earlier. And we have something called knowledge base. And this is just to show off or showcase some of the new features of Creatio, where we can show some suggestions on when we're traveling through DCM.
Yeah, the complaints section will be covered in the templates track. So this is what we'll be focusing there, and with knowledge base as well. So yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so let's take a look how this whole thing works. So we have this little training session, and think of the training session as something that you conduct a business, right? So let's say you're in the business of offering training, and this is what we do in Academy. We offer a lot of trainings, and in your particular case, maybe it's an interaction with a customer or a client. Maybe it's a visit. Maybe it's a consultation of some sort. Maybe you've taken out clients, or maybe you've delivered a talk. You conducted a webinar, whatever the case might be. As long as you want to collect feedback from a contact or many contacts, this add-on is going to be for you. So in our example, we have created a very simple section, and when necessary, I will point out to online resources that can help you out, or probably towards the end, I'll show you the online resources that can help you out with getting started if you know very little about Creatio. And so we've created this section, and inside the section, we've created a couple of fields, and the fields are very simple. There's a field called Hackathon, or a field called name. This is the name of our training that we're offering. It has, or it holds a reference to a contact, or in this case, it's a trainer, so me. I'm assuming that I am offering this training in some time that perhaps the training is about to start, or some time indicating something. Now you'll see that we've got participants and the feedback tabs here. We've added that all with the help of low-code tools, and we have 2 participants already added. We add participants by simply clicking on the plus sign and added the contact. So far, so good. We have implemented, and we'll talk about the implementation of this particular business process. And this business process allows us to send invite to training participants. Now, maybe this wording is a little bit confusing. It's actually not sending an invite. It's sending an invite for feedback, right? Yeah. So this is probably we should work on our wordings a little bit better. So let's go ahead and start this. We're going to send this invite, and as soon as the business process finishes, what we should see is that survey sent will be updated automatically to yes to all the participants to whom, there we go, and it was updated to yes. And so now I have this invite sent. Now, give me a second. I'm going to try to open my Outlook, and hopefully it will open.
Well, from my side, I already received the link to the survey form.
Okay, great. So my Outlook is opening up on the other screen.
Mhm.
And let me show you the type of email that you can expect to receive here. Now, it looks a little bit weird and not many people would want to follow it, but I did it on purpose because at this point, there is absolutely no need for us to make this email pretty. This is just to show how you can put the content inside, right? So how we generate this link, what this token is, we're going to discuss that in details. And the important thing is what happens when you follow the link. When we get to the part that we want to make this content or this email a little bit prettier, I will point you, or Lena will show you how we can use templates to make this stuff a little bit more appealing and not this plain textish. So let's follow this link. When you follow this link, the application will redirect you to a feedback form. And as you can see, it's just a simple HTML form, depending on the speed of your browser. Obviously, the form will load either very fast or maybe a little bit slower. Now, at this point, I would like to point out that this application has nothing to do with Creatio. And it's hosted on a completely different server. It's hosted in Azure. I just picked up some free plan on Azure. And in fact, this application can be hosted anywhere. It can be hosted on GitHub Pages. It can be hosted on Azure Static Site. This is just a client application. There is no backend to it. This is just a client. So you can create it with any vanilla JavaScript. You can use WebAssembly, whatever you want to use, you can use. This is just a client application. And you could see I purposely left it as the test, and I'll point out why we did this in just a bit. When you're loading this form, you'll see that some questions are being asked, and we have a way to answer these questions. This is just HTML stuff. So I'm going to say that I'm very happy with, let's say, this particular feedback. In this case, I'm offering effective, like how good the course, and here's, let's say, recommendation. Someone's saying, how could this course be improved? And we're going to say, it was great. Don't change a thing. And obviously, make sure no spelling mistakes. Okay. Now, we can offer feedback in all these responses. And unfortunately, it is unreasonable to expect that people will go out and actually give you the feedback. However, we do provide option to collect this. So how effective? Let's say it was great. And I really don't want to spend much time showing you how we fill out the form. So we're just going to fill out the same thing in every component. And all we're going to do.
I will fill out
Yeah,
my
go
own
ahead.
as well. I'll
All
provide
right,
you
go
with
ahead.
feedback.
And what we're going to do here is we're just going to obviously submit this submit response button. So once the button is clicked, we will be immediately redirected to the thank you page. And at this point, everything should have worked. Let's go back into our Creatio. And what we should see now is that inside here, the feedback should have been added. So let's go into a feedback tab. We'll see that indeed we have obtained, or we have received, some feedback here. Now we see two feedbacks. The first one is from contact from Lena. The second one is from me. And we have added some average scores here. So that average is basically the score between what Lena submitted, what I submitted. So 10 and 8 gives us an average of 9, and 2 10s obviously give you an average of 10. Now, the interesting part is what happens when you go inside. Let's double click on the record. And in here, you will see that you have a list of questions that were answered. Now, Lena, or me in this case, I've offered 3 answers, 10, 10, and 10. And if I double click once more time, I'll see that I am completely capturing the content here.
That's
and
perfect
this is,
because
yeah,
that information is very valuable, because sometimes when you get
right,
a score, you don't really know what made the person put 7 or 10. Obviously, they
right.
might leave it blank, but if they do provide the information, it's very, very valuable.
Correct. So what we can see here is that, we're capturing all the contextual information, we're capturing all the text, and everything works quite nicely. Now, there are a couple of other features that we can show off for this particular form that we believe made it a little bit more interesting to use than perhaps some other competitive solutions. Let's take a look what we can do if we want to change some parameters of the questions we're asking. So for example, I'm going to go into the survey form. And in here, I'm going to open the survey that we just filled out. And here we're also showing you that you have 2 responses. And what you can see here is that you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 questions: technical side, suggestion, content, and trainer. Let's assume that after a little bit of a trial, you realize that this survey really does not need this tech side question. So all we're going to do is we're just going to come here and we're going to delete this record. Now, deleting the record is simply deletes the record from a collection of records associated with the feedback. And so after the record is deleted, what we can do is we can go back here and you see that now the question or the form only shows you the questions that are actually associated with the feedback. So this form is completely interactive. Yeah, Lena?
Yeah, that was exactly my question. So basically, I can decide which questions I want to put in a form and modify it by myself as a user without going to a developer and asking to modify the page.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
that's great.
Yes, so we've allowed business user or business analyst without any development whatsoever through help of, simple lookups and simple checkboxes to essentially direct the layout or the way the form looks. And I'll show you a few more features in just the detail. And my machine is a development machine, so things work a little bit differently here. So just bear with me when I have to refresh my pages. Okay. So after having deleted this page, let's go ahead and take a look what else we can change. So right now, what you're seeing is that this form, how could the scores be improved? For example, it is giving us just a simple question and it's missing these stars. So we can go back into our Creatio. We can find a list of questions, and the list of questions is inside a lookup. So let's go ahead and find a lookup section here. Here's a list of all lookups. So we're going to come back here. And inside these lookups, we're going to look inside the questions. Now, the package that you will be given, or if you choose to download it, will have all this data included there. So there's nothing for you to do. And just simply go and find a folder called survey and make sure it's your favorite. And then it can be right here, and it's going to be very easy for you to find. Also, it's easy to find it, just by clicking it here. Okay, so now that you have a question, let's take a look at the questions we have. So right now, you see that suggestion has the score set to no. If I just simply come here and change the suggestion to yes, then what's going to happen if I refresh this page, I expect the suggestion question will now have a star rating to it. There you go. So you saw a bit of a delay there, and that we'll talk about those things in just a bit, why this delay is even introduced. So here's the how could this course be improved? Now is asking for a number of stars. And obviously this does not make any business sense, but I just wanted to show you how you could improve this by asking for particular stars. Now, we also have this, how well did the trainer meet, or how did the training meet your needs? Let's go ahead and take a look at this question. So we've got this question here. It's called content. And we have this notion of a placeholder, just like any or most of the HTML text tags can have a placeholder. And a placeholder is nothing more than this text that just kind of shows, right? But it's never submitted back to you. So how did your training meet expectations? So let's assume that you wanted to put something as the analyst. You would say, my placeholder text, and I am just placeholder. Interesting typo. Placeholder text goes here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply accept that change, and I'm going to go back into my feedback form, and I'm going to refresh it one more time. So once the form reloads, there we go. You can see that you can now have a placeholder, and then you can submit as we have already demonstrated. So this is essentially what we have built. Okay, this is the form, and it lives as a client application, and it finds a way to communicate with Creatio, and somehow we have found a way to make them talk. Now, there is nothing really special about making two applications talk. We do it all the time with the help of APIs. However, this is a client-side application. It does not have any backend component. And so the solution that we had to implement here is to use this anonymous web service because we couldn't share any username and password. And this is kind of the whole idea behind it. Okay, so it's a little bit different than a regular web service. It doesn't provide any authentication. It doesn't know anything about tokens and things like that. So we had to kind of program around it to find a way to keep it secure and still be able to communicate between the Creatio and external application.
So we can send this form to anybody, really. It doesn't have to be a Creatio user. It's just as long as we have entered them, in our particular case, into the training participants, they'll receive the form, right?
Okay, that's right. That's right. So we can send it to anyone. And as long as they have a browser that can communicate, or some modern browser, I mean, some older versions will not work, but as long as you have a modern browser, you will be able to fill out this form. Okay,
Perfect.
So now let's take a look at how this thing works. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to switch back to our slides. And in our slides, let's take a look at the flow. And I see that our picture or our video feed is covering, so let me turn it off. So what we're seeing here is that we have a flow essentially of how this operates. In the beginning, or originally, you saw us launching this business process that generates a token and sends the email. And that's represented by the first line where you see a triangle, generate token, email, send the invite. And this little person represents a contact, a person receiving this email. Then it's expected that the person obviously clicks on it. So after they click on it, there will be this application, the one that we just showed you, the one that lives in Azure, will be loaded. And it will send a GET request with that token that we have generated from the email. And that token will be kind of our temporary authentication authorization. The token will contain some information, then we'll talk about it in just a minute so that you understand how it all works. Then obviously Creatio, if token upon success, if token is validated, will submit some information back with the entire layout of this page. So it will have things such as the question, the placeholder, whether or not to show stars, whether or not to show comment there, etc. Okay, and then it's going to pass a collection of those things, so we can have more than one question there. Then when the user finishes submitting the response, and they fill out this form, and at this point there's no validation of any kind, they hit that submit response button, and then the whole thing repeats itself. But now we're going to be posting the results of our survey into Creatio. And so Creatio, once that token yet again gets validated, we can save it into a database. And you saw example of that as the responses appear in your training session. Now, it doesn't have to be training session. It can be any other session, like I mentioned before. It could be activity. It could be anything that requires events, anything that requires essentially participation.
And basically, we can have multiple feedback forms with different sets of questions. We can add those questions and basically put them together. Perfect.
Correct. And you can have multiple forms, and we'll talk about it in just a second.
Okay.
So what I want to talk now is, let's talk about the first line in the diagram. And the first line is going to be in reference to our token generation and sending the invite. So let me find a screen that shows the application. Okay, and let's go and take a look at what's going on here. There is a website online that allows us to look inside this JWT token. Now, everything we do here is going to be using this JWT token. And so this is your JWT. So you could see Azure something Creatio survey. And after the slash, this is where JWT token starts. For a number of technical reasons, I had to rewrite this token and replace a dot with the slash, and I'll explain that in just a bit. So let's go ahead and navigate to jwt.io website. And this is the website that goes into details and explains what JWT token is, where it's used, et cetera, et cetera. But what we're interested in here is not a lecture, but rather an example. Now they give you an example of JWT token. This is what it, too much. Hold on a second. My scroll is acting up here. So this is what JWT token is, and it looks like it consists of three components: a header component, a payload or body component, and then the signature component. The idea behind the JWT token that anyone can read any token. However, only people who have a specific password or a key can encrypt that, and it can always be validated. Okay, so we can encrypt it, let's say on the Creatio side, but then we can read it anywhere. But we can also validate that the token has not been played with or has not been touched. So we know that this is us who created this. So let's paste this token into this form, or paste the part of the URL that makes this token. And I'll paste it like this, and you see that everything is red. So everything is bad. And the reason it's bad is because the token here is expecting to be a dot, not a slash. So let me go and change the slash to a dot, and you can see that some stuff is already appearing. It's just a simply encoded, base64 encoded. And as soon as I change slashes to dots, I get some interesting information here. So I got in the header type, I get the algorithm. So this is the algorithm, how it's encoded. It's telling us that it's a JWT token. And this is not very important for us right now. What's important is what's here inside the payload. Inside the payload, I included 4 important parameters: SID, CID, UID, and RID, and they're all cryptic, but I'll explain what they are. SID stands for survey ID. CID stands for contact ID, just like you would do in regular business process. We need to know the survey you're filing. So here is your SID, and this is just a GUID within Creatio. A CID is just an ID of the contact who is presumably filing this survey. So it's you or me or somebody else who we send it to. A UID and RID has to do with how we designed our data structure. A UID is an entity schema UID, and this will allow us to associate the feedback that received here with a particular section. And RID stands for record ID of the section that we identified here. So essentially what we're saying is that inside this token, we have a complete address where the survey needs to end up. We know who's filing it, against what survey, and which section, and the record of the section. So we got everything we need. When you're looking at this token, it may seem that we don't know the signature. Okay, so the signature is invalid. And that's okay, because the signature is not to be validated by the front end. Front end doesn't really care for the signature. Front end just cares about the payload. Once the payload is received, we can then take this token without making any changes to it and request some data from Creatio. This is the component, okay, that comes second in line. But for now, let's talk about how we can generate this token. Again, we need SID, CID, UID, and RID.
And it all comes from Creatio, right?
Of course, it all comes from Creatio. So let's go quickly take a look at our Creatio application, and let's take a look at the structure of our packages. Now, to do that, I'm going to go for the first time on the cogwheel, scroll all the way down and say advanced settings. Now, for those who want to even more advanced settings, just simply go /0/dev, and it will take you to the same place. Now, when the application loads, you will see that we have a number of packages installed here, and it might appear a little bit more complex than it needs to be. However, the package structure is designed this way for a particular reason. Lena and I worked on this package completely independently of one another, and so I needed to provide an implementation that is somewhat generic. Lena needed to provide something that is generic, and then we needed to bring it together, and so we have a structure of packages. The first package, you'll see it's called survey, then another one called survey base. This is where we're going to implement our logic. Then we have a package that's called complaint processing and business logic, and this is, as the name suggests, is going to implement our business logic. So our add-on is somewhat generic in nature. And because I have, okay, perfect. So what is survey base? And survey base is a bunch of essentially data here.
Oh, you have it filtered.
Oh, I have it filtered.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is a filter.
Okay. So a bunch of data and few objects. And the objects are essentially your database structure, right? So it's a data layout. We have a table for question. We have a table for survey. We have a table for survey question response, for survey question response, etc. Plus the utility tables for things such as notes and attachment, tags and tag, and etc. So it is a very simple structure. We just basically took a couple of tables. We employed the low-code tools, and I will point out to where online you can take e-learning courses how to learn how to use the low-code tools if you don't know how to create your own tables. And let's take a look if there is something else in this package. And it turns out that there isn't much with the exception of this client module. Okay, so we're going to have to look in this. And this is a little bit of a JavaScript to make one lookup appear a slightly different way. Now, once we have this base and we have laid out how the data is stored in the Creatio, then we're going to go and create another package that actually provides all the implementation. Now, and here we see some examples of business processes, some examples of some C# code, and a little bit of imported DLL stuff. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these components. Now, we're starting with the token generation. So let's go and look at the process of generate survey token. So this is going to be a business process that allows us to generate that token. That component that I showed you consists of 4 or 6 important parts that allows us to navigate to the proper section in Creatio. If we open it from here, a business process should open. So let's just give it a second.
And if you're curious about, if you need basic knowledge about how to work with the process designer, we do have extended courses online available for free. You can go into e-learning and and try to understand better which elements responsible for what. So we cover all of them in our documentation and e-learning courses as well.
Correct. So let's now take a look at what's going on here. Now, this looks like a very, very simple process. And indeed it is. It consists only of 3 elements. So you've got a starting element, and there is nothing really specific about the starting element. It's just an element that indicates that it's a start of a business process. We have a terminate, so this indicates a successful completion. If we reach this element, that indicates kind of a return out of your, think of it, if you want to think of it as a function, that it indicates a return. And then obviously in the middle, we have this get token. Now, get token is where we are going in the back end and where we're trying to get our token. So let me see if I can, having trouble with my RDP session here, so things might look like they take longer than they do. Okay, and so here we have a first example of some backend code. Now, this might look a little bit confusing and intimidating, but don't be worried. We're going to cover it all in details. So something inside this token, we're actually going in the backend and we are getting this token. Now, towards the bottom of this, you will see that we are providing some URL. We're setting some URL and we're providing the parts, and we're replacing essentially the token with the dot to token with the slash. Now, the reason I had to do that is because the front end that I'm currently using Microsoft's new shiny Blazor application. And Blazor application, in my personal experience, and that's probably not the way it is, it's not fair to say, but I couldn't figure out how to work with parts or how to do routing with dots. It constantly kept offering me a file, which makes sense. And that has to do with the server configuration. So what I did is I simply said, you know what, forget the dots. Let's just do the route with slashes. And so then the server is not trying to send you a file that doesn't exist and you're not experiencing a 400 error. So this was the whole reason for it. Now, inside this user task, you will see that the first 2 lines is this constructor argument, and I am asking for something called IJWT token. Now, that thing does not exist. That's something that we have created inside of our package, and we're simply consuming that in the main application. Now, we're going to talk about what these things are in just a minute, but let's cover the rest of it. The GUID for SID, CID, and RID are simply process parameters. If we look into a process parameter here, you'll see that parameters filled in with a couple of important values here. There we go. Contact, that's a CID, entity schema, that's EID, etc. Right? So they match to what I'm actually doing inside the token. Then we're going through the backend. We're just extracting necessary information. Okay, and we're saying token, go and get me generated token. This is the method that is implemented in that JWT token class that we're going to look in just a second. Now you might be wondering, like, where is this class and how did I get it loaded? Well, if you look at the methods of this business process, you will see that I have included two namespaces. The first namespace is called Terrasoft Core Factories, and that allows us to use dependency injection container provided within Terrasoft Core. Survey API is where I am providing a list of interfaces that the factories will instantiate or try to get a default implementation of this interface. Now let's go in details and take a look at that. If we go on the back end, you will see that there is a library called Survey API DLL. This library is nothing more than just a list of interfaces. And so our core, our class, our core, right, the dependency injection, knows how to work with those interfaces. And I'll show you that in just a second. Let's open Visual Studio for just a bit, and let's take a look at the code. So the package that you're going to be receiving will consist of of a solution with, for now, two packages, a survey API and the survey itself. I tried to put as many comments as I could think of, but considering that, you know, I am the one writing and I'm the one adding the comments, sometimes I may have omitted comments that are critical to your understanding. If you find some comments missing or you would like to get more information on it, please don't hesitate to raise issue on GitHub where all this code is posted, and I'll try to update it as questions appear. So the survey API offers just two interfaces, a JWT token and claims. And we'll talk about each and one of them in just a bit. It also offers another class that offers or that exposes some features of Terrasoft configuration, or other words, main application. The only thing that we're doing here is we are exposing the functionality of a WebSocket messages, and icon to survey is just an interface that I chose to name it, so that it's configuration to survey, so that it's easier to understand what we're dealing with here. So if we look at this interface by itself, it's nothing, just a bunch of interfaces. So where's the implementation? Well, the implementation is going to be here inside the solution or inside a project called survey. And so in here, let's go ahead and expand our files. And inside the files, we will be consuming these files and providing implementation. In terms of package dependencies, if you look at the survey and you look at the references here, you will see that, where's my reference? Why am I, oops. Come on, my mouse is a little bit lagging, but this package, okay, has a dependency on the API itself. So we just go and add a reference or a package, not a package dependency. What is it called? The project dependency, okay, and we say that survey will depend on survey API. That's it. Very simple. Now, here's the class that says JWT token, and let's take a look at what this class implements. So let's try going inside. There we go. And the first thing you will see is that we have this default binding attribute on this class. This default binding attribute is actually required for Terrasoft core factories or class factory to provide this option of instantiating the implementation. So we need to make sure that we decorate our class with this attribute. Otherwise, our DI container is not going to be able to find implementation of this interface. Now, the class itself also has to implement this interface. And so the contract is defined here, and the contract is now common to survey and the main application. Thus, it was imported. And so now the main application and my survey package share the same contract, so we can speak the same language. Now, in here, you will see a couple of properties. First, you'll see that there is something called user connection. A user connection is a very important component or very important class within Creatio, and this is the class that offers necessary components to query database, to understand who you are, to get your user connection, and a bunch of other things. And we can't really get into all the details, but just know that user connection is very important to when you're working with Creatio. So in here, just like with any other class, I am offering some constructor. And in the constructor, I'm saying that whenever I construct this JWT token, I need to receive a user connection. A user connection is required because I want to go into my system settings, marked here as such, to go and read the value of my symmetric key. Now, I didn't bother with a symmetric key because I didn't want my front-end application to do anything with the token, so the symmetric key was perfectly fine. We're using the symmetric key to generate a signature and to validate it back on the server side here. So my JWT token does, the constructor itself does, what normally constructors do. It just simply grabs a reference to user connection and just stores it securely somewhere in its properties or in fields. I tried to document as much as possible here, and even giving you some code examples. As you could see that there is some example here and some code how to consume it. If you find this insufficient, please do let me know, and I'll try to add as much documentation as possible. Now, I got a couple of methods here. The first method is going to be generate token, and the other method that is opposite is obviously to validate token. If we generate something, then we probably need to validate. As you can imagine, validation will have to do when we're receiving the token, just to know if token has been forged and has been played with, and if it's not the token that we sent out originally. We can do that because we hold reference to the original encryption string or to the password, or in my case, secret, that we use to generate the token. To generate the secret is fairly straightforward. Let's take a look at this thing. Oh, I'm trying to click and just lagging a little bit.
So I think it's good. It's good.
Yeah, it's good. So the secret is a very simple thing. It's just the property, and I'm going inside a system setting, and this is the feature of Creatio that everyone has access to. And I'm trying to get a value, providing user connection, the name of the system setting, and I am getting a reference to the value of the object. All I'm doing with the value of the object, casting it back into my string. And so I have my secret string right now. Now, obviously, you can go ahead and you can implement it in a slightly better way. You can put a check if this thing exists or not. I didn't bother with this because I knew it would exist on this particular application. Before shipping in production, I would definitely wrap it in the if, just to make sure that, that we're not running into some sort of an issue here. Okay, so now that I got my secret from a database, and my secret in the database, you can see inside system settings. So let me go and show you that. So we're going to go into system settings. And inside system settings, we need to find a setting, and we can find it by either name or code. So if we click on system settings, survey secret, there we go. And inside the survey secret, don't be surprised, I purposely left it like this. This is just a randomly generated string, and it's not even generated with any code. It's me randomly typing things in the keyboard. This is what I've generated. Now, the secret itself is an encrypted string, meaning that if you move it from one package to another, because the way encryption works with Creatio, the salt of every Creatio is slightly different. So even if I include the value, it will not decrypt to the same thing when you're moving the packages. So the bottom line is, if you are providing an encrypted string, then you have to make sure that on the target environment, on your production, pre-production, whatever, you resave this setting, because it needs to be encrypted with the salt that is related to, or with the keys essentially that are related to a particular instance. So if you include the value in your data binding and then you move it, it's not going to work. Okay, you just make sure you come back here, just copy it, save it, and everything's going to be fine. Or better yet, never offer the password, obviously, and have it at production environment, just simply type it in, right? But I wanted to make it as easy as possible. So here's your system setting. Okay, let's go back to our thing here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to generate this token. Now, inside this generated token, I tried to provide some information what this stuff does, but essentially we're just using Microsoft standard libraries to generate JWT token. We're feeding the secret into the key. Here's how I'm creating my symmetric security key. And then inside my symmetric security key, I am essentially encoding these couple of properties. Straight from the business process, I am getting all these values. You remember we've created those parameters. And so here is your token. Now the token is set in stone and it cannot be changed. If you change at least even one character, the whole thing will break because the signature will break, and I will easily detect it when time comes to validating it. And if you're going to come back to me and say, okay, give me data, and you present an invalid token, well, I'm not going to give you anything, okay, because I know the token has been, it's been faked. And all we're doing here is we're just simply returning, returning the token by writing it to a string. Now, there is another offsetting method that allows us to validate this token, and this returns us an iClaims. And essentially, it's a collection of the items that we have originally encoded here. Now, for my convenience, I included them in iClaim object, and it just simply returns a bunch of claims here with these things. And if the validation fails, it returns null. Now, since it's returning us null, we will check for null when we're actually consuming it. And if it comes back with null, then we know that it failed. And if it doesn't come back with null, if it actually comes back with claims, then we know we have succeeded. And so this is all we're doing. And it has nothing to do with Creatio. This is just a Microsoft standard security tokens here. Okay, good. So now we know how to receive these tokens. Now let's talk about the services that accommodate this kind of transaction. Now, I'll show you the client application a little bit later, but for now, let's just concentrate on the server side. On the server side, you will see that we have this survey service, and the survey service class is a web service class that is responsible for responding to the responses and providing, responding to get and post requests from the client. It consists of a couple of regions for your convenience. So it's got a constructor, it's got a couple of properties, and it's got some methods that are private and public. And I am not sure what I meant to do with this thing. Yes, I guess I should merge them. I'm not sure why I did this. My mistake. So I'll make sure that I reapply it on GitHub. So let's take a look first at the public methods. In a public method, we will see that we are responding to only few parameters. By the way, if you don't know how to build a configuration web service, I believe I added a documentation or reference to documentation here. Yes, you can see that we've added reference to documentation here. There. Oh, geez, so laggy today. Let's open this and let's open this. I think I've added, yes, so I've added here academic Creatio developer backend, whatever this link is, but essentially what this will allow you to do is to get some references, how to work with ORM and how to get with configuration services. So make sure you pay attention to the comments that are here. Okay, so they're for your convenience there. Okay, so let's go back into these public methods. And if there is anything to know about cores or anything to know about anonymous services, is that because my application is hosted on Azure, but the backend is hosted on Creatio, we run into this issue of cores. Now, the way cores works is by providing certain cores policy and browser issuing a pre-flight request. Now, we have to make sure that we program our backend to accommodate for those pre-flight requests. And if you want to know more about the cores, just follow this article and it will explain what cores is, and just read it. It's a fairly quick read. Now, the important thing here is that every time a request is sent to a different origin website, a browser will issue a pre-flight request with the verb options. Now, we want to make sure that we respond to it with the proper cores. And so this is the reason that this service exists. It will just simply respond to everything at this endpoint, okay, on this URL template and say, yep, it's allowed. So essentially, we're saying that anyone in the world with a browser can talk to us. And then there are two methods, the get method and the post method. The get method returns survey data, and the post method is responsible for storing the survey data. If we look at the get data, get survey data, you will see that I am asking for a route here, or I'm asking for three parameters, age, B, and S. Each H is the header, B is the body, and it's called data, but whatever. In my case, it's a B, and string S for signature. So I can reassemble the three parameters back into the token, and I can simply validate. Okay, so here I'm checking to validate, and I'm saying if claims are not null, because if the validation will fail, I will just simply return whatever this method returns. And this method will return survey data. Now, get survey data, now because we have all these claims and we know the record ID and the entity schema that the survey relates to, and the contact and all this information is known to us, we can just simply go and create a database request. And so if we go inside the survey data method, you will see that it's got few things it needs to, So it needs to know something about the survey itself. And I'm taking the survey straight from claims. What am I going to return? Just a tuple of name and notes. I don't think I'm using notes right now, but that's something that we can expand in the future. And essentially, we're going inside the survey, and you could see that we're creating an entity schema, an entity. We're fetching it from a database by providing its key. And then we're just simply returning two fields that we're interested in, survey name and survey notes. And that's it. The next thing that we need to do is obviously in our survey, rather than getting just a simple description that it's a survey form, we also need to provide something related to these questions. Now you'll see that here I'm providing simply a list of survey questions, and survey questions, you may have guessed, is going to be a DTO that we're going to serialize and send off on the JSON. So if you expose this, it's the same thing. It just creates another entity collection and goes and collects the necessary information. I made sure to use everything with the entity schema query, and I did not use select classes to select something from a database. Now, perhaps this could be changed in future to use select classes to make it a little bit faster, but in my particular example, I didn't think that it mattered at all. So now that we have a list of survey questions, and now that we have a list of, or a descriptor of the survey itself, it's time for us to respond to the get response or get request. Now, I get request in my particular case, and let me scroll up a little more. My get request is going to be sending back the survey data. Now, let's take a look at what the survey data is. And survey data, you will find a sample of it inside a DTO, in DTO folder. And all it is just a data contract with data members in it so that we can encode it without actually doing it by hand. So we just kind of let Creatio take care of it because there is a serialization already included. So all I'm sending back is the name of the survey, whatever the notes are, and a list of questions as IEnumerable of survey question. So fairly straightforward thing, something that you would do on a regular basis with any controllers whatsoever. Okay. So this is what we did on getting the data, and we're going to take a look at the client side in just a bit. But for now, let's cover receiving the data back. A similar thing happens when we're getting the survey back. Let me roll up. Let me collapse all the unnecessary components here. And let's take a look now at this method. So what's going to happen here? If we pass the validation, so we're going to be getting a model of our result. We'll talk about this model in a bit, and you could, as you may have guessed, it's going to be in DTL. We're going to create this claim by providing a user connection. You remember I showed you earlier the implementation. So here I go. The only difference here is because the implementation actually lives in this solution or in this CS, in this project, we don't need to call the factory because we have direct access to it. So we're getting a JWT token by spoon feeding a user connection into it. We're checking that the thing actually exists, that it's not null. If it's null, we just get out. And if it's not null, I am doing this. Now, this might look a little bit unusual, but I don't want for a user to sit and wait while I'm, doing my database stuff. My client application has absolutely no features at this point to offer what happens if the, like if we were unable to send something. So I am essentially saying is, if you send that submit button, I expect it to be submitted. And if
Mm-hmm.
something goes bad on my side, on the side of Creatio, because I didn't program something, well, I don't want to bother client with asking for a survey form one more time. I think it's a bad experience. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just always returning. You could see that I'm always returning true after I set my cores. And I am essentially saying, yep, great job. Thank you very much. Even though the data has not yet physically been committed to the database. And this is why I'm using this task. So I fire and forget this method, save response. And what am I feeding in the response? I am feeding the resultant bunch of claims that I have gotten from the request itself. So here's my result. I get my claims from the route and from the parameters, and then I get my submitted data right here. So let's go and take a look at my submitted data. So what's going on here? If you press, well, if we go inside, you'll see that it consists of two classes, again, two contracts, a very straightforward thing. It's got a list of answers and the token. Now the token is going to be included here. And then the answer itself is just what you expect to receive, that score, the comment, and the question ID itself. Now, if we want to offer some additional feature for a feedback form, for example, we want to ask for date time of some sort. Let's say you're firing a survey and you're sending it to a list of clients, and you say, well, when are you expecting to make a commitment decision, right? When are you going to make a decision? You say, okay, within the next 3 to 6 months, and you want to offer that date range. It would be very easy for us to just add a couple of fields here, date start, date end, and simply communicate back and forth. So this would be a very easy customization. This is what kind of I expect the people who are going to be the consumer of the application to do. So here's an example how to use an integer and a string. And if you need some other data type, then by all means, just simply enrich the model and collect that data. Perfect. Now that we have the data, right? So now that we have the data, the next thing that we need to look at is what we're doing with this response. And just like with the get, we were getting the data out of the database. Now with the response, we need to make sure that we save this response. Now, again, I tried to document as much as possible, and I left some tasks to do for future expansion simply because I didn't have enough time to implement everything. So in here, we're essentially saving the data, save answers. So here's the method that is responsible for saving the answers. And it just simply takes a result and the survey ID. So we know the record to associate it with. And with the help of entity schema query, it's just going to go and create all these records. The reason I'm using entity schema query here rather than an update or an insert is to make sure that your business processes fire correctly, because I know that we're going to be using business processes. So I went ahead and implemented everything in the business on the entity level. And so we know that every trigger is going to work correctly. And this is essentially what the form does. It saves the record into a database, and then it even fires a WebSocket message. And this is the implementation of this conf to survey interface. So there is a WebSocket message implementation. And my original idea was to kind of make my form a little bit interactive to make sure that it refreshes itself, but I haven't really implemented that. So there we go. There's a to-do. And if someone wants to go and implement it, by all means, go ahead and implement it, create a model, send it off, and just make the front end experience a little bit better. So this is what we're doing here on the backend. So let me take a look at something. Yes. Okay. And at this point, I think we can move on to what we are doing on the client application. So I think we're kind of done with the backend here. So let's move on to the client app now. So let me close this instance of my Visual Studio, and I'm going to try locating one that I need. And I believe I saved it here. No. Let me go. I think I saved it somewhere on C drive. Demo survey, I think I call. Right. And for demo survey, this is going to be, again, something that you're going to get, something that you will be able to find in the repository. And this is simply a front-end application that knows how to communicate with those two services that will get you data and respond data. Now, this is a framework from Microsoft that allows you to program everything in C#. There's no JavaScript. So that's great. However, that may not be for everyone. So if you want to implement similar thing with just a regular vanilla JavaScript, by all means, go ahead and do that. I just chose not to. Okay, so this program essentially, all it does, this represents a form, and you can recognize some familiar patterns already. You can see that we have this form with this gradient background, right? And then we're just simply providing a bunch of HTML here. And inside of this HTML, we're offering some links. And here's the meat and potato of this thing. So this is a result. And if you want to try out Blazor, and the easiest thing that you may want to do is just try overwriting this result. This is a test thing, just to know that it works. Now in here, I've created a couple of components. So here's my edit form, that's just a standard component, but here's my component. It's called question. And I am feeding it some properties. Okay, so as soon as the page loads, or as soon as the browser hits that endpoint and this page gets loaded, this is what I'm going to try to do. So I'm going to go inside this edit form, and I'm going to go for each in the form model questions. Now, the question obviously becomes, what is all this stuff? So let's just quickly cover it. We're not going to spend too much time on it. So the question is the form model question, and the form model is essentially my model that is responsible for storing the data. It's something that this edit form is bound to. You can see that model is bound to form model, so it holds the information about the input and the output. Now, if we look further down here, okay, you will see that the code here injects through up on top. We have to look at it on top. Let me minimize this section, and you'll see that Blazor allows us to inject things. And since this is a WebAssembly, this is not your typical JavaScript, we can inject things just like they're similar to how, let's say, Angular would do things, and we can provide routes. So here's my route H, B, and S. Had I kept it at the dot, and things are kind of getting weird here because it's looking for a file, like I mentioned before. So I just replaced it with the slashes. That was the whole thing for it. But essentially what I'm doing here is I am injecting this HTTP client factory. And if you ever written a .NET Core web service or tried to call some external web service, you know that there is an HTTP client factory that allows you to get an implementation of HTTP client. Now, this HTTP client factory allows me to go and ask for my data. So we have a couple of events here. Okay, so here's a method to get data, and it will be triggered on initialized async. So as soon as my form gets initialized, I get an instance of my HTTP client through a factory. I call it Creatio. And in here, I'm going to go and say, okay, let's go and get this data. I'm providing the URL that I'm going to get to, and I'm providing a link that this URL needs to go and get the data from. Doing the regular thing that you would have done in the backend, so just creating your request message and parsing your response, and here's my model, and that's it. That's all I'm doing here. Now, in here, the important things are make sure that if your Creatio lives on HTTP, sorry, if your Azure or wherever you're publishing this application lives on HTTPS, that your Creatio also lives on HTTPS. Otherwise, you're going to have this, forgetting what this error means, but essentially it says that if the request is made with HTTPS on the client side, it also has to go out of the browser also on HTTPS. So make sure that is addressed. Also, if you're hosting your endpoint, if you're hosting Creatio on IaaS, which most of you probably will, there is a bit of an issue with the IaaS default configuration. The thing between the slashes, okay, so the way it parses, will not accept more than 260 characters. And so you need to make sure that you adjust the URL maximum segment length. And there's a lot of articles online how to do that. But essentially, you're limited to 260 characters between the slashes. And that's not enough to pass all the token information. So anyway, once you do that, here we're parsing the data, and now we're putting it inside the model. And then we're submitting this model. So once we catch the event that the person handles the submit, so here's my handle submit button, Okay, all we're doing is we're just saying send data, and my send data, as you may have guessed, it just simply sends this data, and it's not awaiting for any response, because I knew that since I am programming the front end and the back end, I don't care for this response, and I may have, I may even remove this and keep it as such, and all I'm doing is just simply navigating to on success at all times. So this transition looks very fast, even though we haven't finished writing to the database. Now, there is one more thing that we may need to look at when you're configuring this, and there is this message handler, and this is just a standard way of creating a delegating handler for your messages. So in my case, I'm just simply adding an application JSON header, but this is normally how you would add an application JSON. And if you wanted to, you could even add here policy for your transient error. So really powerful features that Blazor offers us without much effort, especially for those familiar with those classes from the front end, from the back end. Okay, good. So now we know how to handle this data. Let's quickly take a look how we are building the questions, so that if you want to replicate it. So we've created this question thing, and this question thing is my own component, and you will find it inside, inside the pages. Here's my question raiser component. And all this thing does, it essentially has a bunch of properties, some raised question, placeholder, answers, answer change, and things that are responsible for communicating this handle on change events. So here's the model related to one particular question. Here's what to do when the question gets changed, and here's how we're storing the value. So just standard kind of a Blazor way of doing things. There is a standard way for doing Angular things, and this is just different. Okay. And the interesting thing was I used this Rasden rating, and Rasden is a very popular Blazor UI control library, and you can just go online, take a look at what this Rasden is, and I haven't made any changes to it whatsoever, and took me all of probably 10, 15, maybe 10 minutes to have this form online. I didn't have to write any code whatsoever, and the great thing, there was no JavaScript here at all. So now our application is completely coded, and our application can communicate with the, so this is our front end, and it can now communicate with the back end, and now can submit information into Creatio and store it in the appropriate endpoints. All we have to do now is we need just to simply send the request to a user. And this is the last component that I want to show you. Inside this demo package, and I think it's here. Inside this demo package, I've created another business process that says generate survey token, and the other one is called create survey invite. Now, I did not mean for anyone to use this. This package is just simply to show an example of how you could generate a token, but it's by no means the way that you probably going to end up using it. And the reason for it is you probably don't want to send it to one particular person. You want to send it to a collection of people. And I'm sure Lena's going to take a great job or do a great job explaining.
Yeah, this is actually something we did a little bit later on,
right,
when we got to work on the template. Yeah,
that's right. But this is just an example of how one could go ahead about implementing this thing. And so you've got this generate survey URL. This is a sub process that calls the process we have looked earlier, and when it loads, you will see that it calls the process from earlier. It gets that token. You remember we talked about that token. So it generates the token, returns the token, and all we're doing is we're just simply using it inside this send email component. So this is nothing more than just an example or sample of how these tokens can be generated. As you can see, I am feeding the information about a contact, and this is static stuff. There's nothing special about it. So here's a contact, entity schema, record ID, and the survey. So this is just an example. And here's a token in the URL that it kind of gives me back. Now, once I have this information from generate survey token sub process, I can now use the send email component to actually send the email to a particular person. In our case, in this particular case, I believe I'm sending it to myself here, and I hard coded that value. And then in the later examples or in the parallel tracks, which are what we're going to call them, we will learn about how we can make it so that we're sending it to a group of people rather than to one particular individual. And so now, after having completed all these steps, it is now for us to go in the back end and take a look, okay, well, how can we package it and what is this data binding? Now, a data binding is an important component of providing information that comes along with your package. Now, in this package, I've explained how we have configured our application to have certain business logic, some backend, how we're writing things into a database. But we also had one dependency on the fact that this system setting with this encryption key, if you will, needs to exist, right? This was one thing that I needed to include. And so in this particular package, this is one thing that I am including. It's not enough to provide implementation. You also need to sometimes provide some data here. The data I'm providing is the system setting value and system setting itself. Okay, so when you're doing data binding, and I'll point you in the document, not in documentation, but in the code, when you go on the GitHub, there will be a list, that there is a list of useful articles, and they will point you to how to do data binding. So data binding is a very important component, and it essentially allows us to not only include the backend logic, but also to include some data that goes along for the ride with this package. Okay, so this is all there is about this survey package. So there is all the stuff is implemented in the backend. Now, let's talk a little bit more about this survey base. And there is one component that I wanted to address inside survey base. And survey base is a list of tables. And so inevitably, what you will see is that there is a lot more data binding to make sure that we include information in the package. If we filter for this data binding, you will see that some are called human readable names and other things are called computer generated things. And that has to do with with the tools that I use to generate these things. So when you see human readable names, this is something that you do by hand. When you see something like this is when the wizards, our low-code tools, do for you. Now, our low-code tools can't read your mind and say, okay, well, did you want to create a lookup and then include its value in your package? Well, how are we supposed to know? We don't know that. So it is your responsibility as the developer or as the business analyst to make sure that, yes, that stuff actually moves from place to place. It's important. And so these things are computer generated or wizard generated. And these things are generated with the help of a developer, so generated by hand. So what did we include here? We included information such as a folder. You remember we created that survey folder. So here I'm showing you how to actually create it. So lookup folder and lookup in folder. Those are two items that you need to create, and et cetera, et cetera. So here's a list of questions and things like this. There's also a couple of client modules, but one that I believe we want to look at is going to be the survey response page. And if we look at the survey response page, there's one particular lookup that I wanted to address. And this lookup has to do with the structure that we're dealing, where we're offering entity schema name and the record ID. By default, you just simply say, okay, my lookup has a data source, and here's ID of the record inside that data source. But your data source is normally known. In my case, my data source is not known. So what I'm doing here is I am essentially using some elements here, such as, set caption, set display value, and entity schema query request to adjust for that, right? So I'm going inside the database, I'm looking for things, and I'm doing standard kind of operations here with the entity schema query on the client side. And so here's a decent example of how to use that. The actual lookup itself doesn't exist as the column. It exists as the virtual thing. So that's not probably, but this is why you will see later we will go and we will do things in a slightly different way. So we can just simply bind to this package because it's simply a virtual lookup. It doesn't exist. And I'm offering you an example of how you can use a virtual column here to provide implementation. Here, I am explicitly saying that there is no display value and there is no reference schema name. So we have to look everything up dynamically. But this is probably another component that is somewhat interesting about this package, and everything else is fairly straightforward with the help of local tools. All right, so I think this is all I wanted to mention about this particular package, Lena. Now it's time for us to maybe take a look at the other tracks, or, oh, thank you, antivirus.
Well, I think it's let's sum up what we've looked at in the add-on. The other tracks are also running, where we will explore additional things. But in this particular session, we looked at the survey add-on, which allows you to, as a user, again, I'll point this out, while there is a lot of things that were done by a developer, by Kirill, I, as a user, will not need to be a developer if I need to modify those survey forms. I'll be able to use them as a regular section in Creatio. I create my survey record, I add questions to it, and I can add more questions into my lookup, modify how I want to treat them, whether they have a comment, whether they have a score, and basically build my form all in Creatio, which later will be available once we email it through the link to anybody that we need to gather feedback from. So
correct.
This is what our add-on does. And in the template track, we will see how this works with basically another business case where you have complaints maybe that you will create based on the negative feedback that you receive. So we'll tie those together neatly.
Okay, perfect. So let me switch to slides. Let me see if we have anything left here. So let me scroll through this. So here's a list of, or not a list, but here's a repository that you can use to clone these solutions. So you will, inside this repository, you will receive everything you need to build this application. Now, it will also contain items related to complaints and business logic. So just watch out for that, because it's going to contain the entire solution, not just these two, or not just the survey and the survey base. So this repository is something that will give you access to essentially all the source code. Okay. Perfect. And the next, let's take a look what we have on the next slide. And at this point, we are done, Lena. So thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and we are excited to see what you're going to build for us in the next 3 weeks. Thank you very much.
Don't forget, we have a live Q&A session at 12 p.m. So if you do have questions, please join us for that session. It will be one session for all 3 tracks. So if you have questions about the template, the add-on, please join us.
You know what, Lena, I just realized that I think we forgot to mention things about the Academy at all, and where people can find some help. So let's quickly just go over some examples here. So as you see, 2 people talking to you are the 2 people presented. So we
always talking to you.
Right. So where and how can you get help online? So some help was encoded in code. You saw me leaving some comments and breadcrumbs there, so you can just follow those links. But if you're in doubt, you just simply can go inside either documentation or trainings tab right here. So if you go inside the trainings tab, this is a great resource for you to start, and you can follow this e-learning courses. And there's quite a lot of courses broken down for developers, users, or business analysts, and you can enroll into some of them. In here, you can choose the role that you want to take. So you can be a developer, or you can be a business analyst. And so you will get an appropriate collection of recorded videos or recorded modules that will include things like videos and articles and maybe even quizzes, right? So that's important. If you're a complete novice and you don't know much about Creatio, this is a fantastic resource that you can use to your advantage to start training. And don't be swayed by the fact that there's only 3 components here. Once you go inside,
there are more modules.
They expand. Yes, they expand to quite a few. I think there was about 20 hours or 15 hours of video recorded. So
like
significant amount of content. I don't want to say the number, but anyway, that's one. And then the other component is obviously the documentation itself. If you are tired of watching videos, then go inside the documentation, and it's again broken down for user documentation, developer, something about releases. So when the releases are coming, so our release notes, and then some other things. Okay, so what you will want to do is you will want to go into a developer developer documentation as far as this track is concerned, and then you can read about architecture, you can read about getting started, you can read about integration and APIs, development tools, and unfortunately, in this short period or this track, we couldn't squeeze as much information as we wanted to. And so we're leaving you with these resources where you can go ahead and find more information. As I mentioned before, if there's something that is unclear, and if you find error or bug in the code that we have published, feel free to raise a GitHub issue or just write us an email and say such and such, you guys made a mistake, could you please fix it? And we'll try fixing it. Okay, so we'll definitely work with you, and it is in our best interest to make sure that you are as successful as possible. And I think at this point, that's it, Lena.
Yep.
So again, thank you very much all for coming. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye.